A playful tourist snowball prank at Canada's most sacred memorial sparked chaos when the guards' unexpected response left everyone frozen in shock. And that was only the beginning of a moment that would shake the nation and forever change how people view the sanctity of memorial grounds. Dawn painted Ottawa's Parliament Hill in hues of silver and gold, the morning sun reflecting brilliantly off fresh snow that had blanketed the capital overnight. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood as a silent sentinel, its granite surface dusted with crystalline white, while the eternal flame cast dancing shadows across the pristine landscape. It was the kind of Canadian winter morning that belonged on postcards, with temperatures hovering just below freezing and snowflakes still drifting lazily from a pearl gray sky that promised more snow to come. The capital had awakened to a transformed world. Every surface gleamed with a fresh coating of powder that had fallen steadily through the night, turning the usually bustling city into a winter wonderland. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The early morning street cleaners had already been hard at work, their orange trucks leaving neat paths through the accumulated snow, their flashing lights reflecting off the surrounding buildings in a hypnotic dance. Despite the early hour and biting cold, tourists had already begun gathering at the National War Memorial. They came wrapped in colorful winter coats and knit caps, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp air as they snapped photos and whispered in hushed, reverent tones. Some carried cups of steaming Tim Hortons coffee, warming their hands as they admired the majestic monument. Children in puffy snowsuits waddled through the fresh powder, their parents keeping them behind the ceremonial rope barriers, with gentle reminders about respect and dignity. The ceremonial guard stood with characteristic stillness, a member of the Royal Canadian Regiment who represented centuries of military tradition. His dark greatcoat and bearskin cap cut a striking figure against the whiteness, while polished boots remained perfectly placed despite the gathering snow. Though barely visible, a small Canadian flag pin on his collar caught occasional glints of sunlight, a subtle reminder of the nation he served. The guard's face remained impassive, yet his eyes held the sharp alertness of someone who understood the profound significance of their duty. Japanese tourists huddled together near the eastern corner of the memorial, consulting guidebooks and pointing respectfully at the monument's intricate details. Their tour guide, a middle-aged woman in a red winter coat, spoke softly in Japanese about the significance of the eternal flame and its connection to similar memorials worldwide. An elderly veteran wearing a Legion beret stood quietly off to the side, head bowed in morning prayer, his medals catching the early light. Two young students from the nearby University of Ottawa paused on their way to class, removing their earbuds out of deference to the solemnity of the space. The fresh snow had transformed the memorial grounds into something magical. Delicate icicles adorned the surrounding wreaths and ceremonial chains, creating natural prisms that scattered rainbow light across the scene. Even the usual sounds of downtown Ottawa seemed muffled by the blanket of white, lending an almost cathedral-like silence to the memorial plaza. The bronze figures of the memorial itself wore caps of snow, their stoic faces seeming even more profound against the winter backdrop. A group of school children on a field trip from Montreal arrived, their teacher speaking softly in French as she explained the significance of the site. "C'est un lieu sacré," she whispered, gesturing to the tomb. "A sacred place." The children nodded solemnly, their usual playfulness tempered by the dignified atmosphere. One young girl placed a small handmade paper poppy at the base of the memorial, her small gesture of respect bringing a smile to her teacher's face. Among the gathering crowd, a park's maintenance worker quietly cleared the walkways with practiced efficiency, being careful not to disturb the ceremonial aspects of the site. He worked methodically, creating neat paths through the snow while leaving the natural beauty of the winter scene intact around the memorial itself. His name tag read Michel, and he'd been tending these grounds for over 2 decades, treating each morning's work with the same reverence as a groundskeeper at a cathedral. The guard's shift change approached, marked by the distant sound of boots crunching through snow. Another soldier emerged from the guardhouse, his movements precise despite the slippery conditions. The crowd watched in respectful silence as the two guards executed their ceremonial exchange, their disciplined movements a testament to countless hours of training. Every step, every turn, every gesture was performed with meticulous attention to detail, the snow adding an extra layer of challenge to their already demanding routine. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the snow-covered plaza. A local photographer set up his tripod at a respectful distance, capturing the interplay of light and shadow across the memorial's face. Two elderly couples wrapped warmly in matching wool coats shared memories of their own military service, speaking in hushed tones about friends long gone but never forgotten. Yet among this scene of winter tranquility and solemn respect, no one could have predicted how quickly everything would change. No one noticed the group of American college students approaching from Spark Street, still buzzing from their morning visit to the Byward Market. They walked with the carefree attitude of young tourists on their first international adventure, taking selfies with every snow-covered landmark they passed. Their laughter carried across the quiet plaza, seeming unusually loud in the reverent atmosphere. And certainly, no one could have imagined how their presence would transform this peaceful winter morning into a moment that would soon capture international attention and spark fierce debates about respect, tradition, and the consequences of treating sacred spaces like tourist attractions. Corporal James McKinnon stood motionless at his post, his 6'2" frame a testament to the unwavering dedication of the ceremonial guard. At 32 years old, he represented the perfect blend of military experience and physical prime that the position demanded. His path to this prestigious posting had been anything but ordinary. From peacekeeping missions in conflict zones to advanced military training in harsh Arctic conditions, McKinnon had earned every accolade through sheer determination and an unshakable sense of duty. The morning's heavy snowfall didn't faze him in the slightest. Through his intensive training at the Combat Training Center in Gagetown, New Brunswick, he had learned to stand guard in conditions far worse than this. The light snowflakes settling on his bearskin cap and greatcoat were almost pleasant compared to the bone-chilling Arctic winds he'd endured during northern sovereignty exercises. His posture remained perfect, shoulders back, chin level, eyes forward, a living embodiment of military precision. Despite the cold seeping through his boots, McKinnon's mind remained sharp and alert. His eyes, a striking shade of gray that matched the winter sky, scanned the memorial grounds with practiced efficiency. Years of specialized training had taught him to observe everything while appearing to look at nothing. He noticed the elderly veteran who had been standing in quiet contemplation for the past hour, the young family trying to keep their toddler from crossing the ceremonial rope, and the group of tourists huddled together consulting their guidebooks. The weight of his ceremonial rifle felt familiar against his shoulder, its polished wood and metal a reminder of the centuries of tradition he represented. Each piece of his uniform had been meticulously prepared the night before. Brass buttons polished to a mirror shine, creases pressed to razor sharpness, leather boots worked to a gleam that reflected the morning light. This attention to detail wasn't just about appearance, it was about honoring those who had served before him. McKinnon's dedication to his role went beyond mere professional duty. His grandfather had served in World War II, and his great-uncle's name was among those honored at other memorials across the country. Standing guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier wasn't just a job to him, it was a sacred trust, a way of honoring not only his own family's sacrifices, but those of countless others who had given everything for their country. The morning's snowfall had created an almost ethereal atmosphere around his post. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, but his face remained impassive, embodying the stoic dignity expected of the ceremonial guard. The occasional gust of wind sent snowflakes swirling around him, but he might as well have been carved from the same granite as the memorial itself, for all the reaction he showed. Through his peripheral vision, McKinnon caught glimpses of tourists taking photos, their cameras and phones pointed in his direction. He was used to being photographed. It came with the position, but he never let it distract him from his primary duty. Some visitors seemed to think the guards were there merely for show, like living statues meant for tourist entertainment. They didn't understand that every member of the ceremonial guard was a fully trained soldier, capable of responding to any situation with military precision and discipline. His mind briefly wandered to the morning's briefing, where the guard commander had emphasized the importance of maintaining composure, despite increasing incidents of tourist misconduct at memorial sites worldwide. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Social media had created a new challenge, with some visitors seeking viral fame through increasingly disrespectful behavior. McKinnon had sworn to himself that such disrespect would never go unchallenged on his watch. The snow continued to fall, adding another layer of white to his broad shoulders. In his 3 years as a member of the ceremonial guard, McKinnon had developed an almost supernatural ability to remain still despite any distraction. Summer heat, driving rain, biting wind, nothing fazed him. His record for maintaining absolute stillness during his 2-hour shifts was legendary among his fellow guards. Behind his stoic exterior, McKinnon's military training remained ever present. His muscles were relaxed but ready, his senses alert to any potential disturbance. He had earned multiple commendations for his ability to handle difficult situations with a perfect balance of authority and restraint. Whether dealing with overly enthusiastic tourists or managing potentially disruptive situations, his responses were always measured, professional, and effective. As the morning crowd continued to grow, McKinnon maintained his vigilant watch. Each passing hour brought new groups of visitors, some understanding the solemnity of the sight, others treating it more like a tourist attraction. Yet through it all, he remained the embodiment of military discipline and national pride, a living reminder of the respect due to those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Little did Corporal McKinnon know that this seemingly routine winter morning would soon test every aspect of his training, discipline, and judgment. The incident that was about to unfold would not only challenge his professional composure, but would also make him the center of a national conversation about respect, tradition, and the modern world's treatment of sacred spaces. As the morning progressed, subtle changes began rippling through the previously serene atmosphere of the National War Memorial. Like the first warning tremors before an avalanche, small disturbances started to accumulate, barely noticeable at first but growing increasingly difficult to ignore. The respectful hush that had blanketed the memorial grounds began to shift, invaded by occasional bursts of laughter and loud conversations that seemed jarringly out of place. The elderly veteran who had been standing in quiet contemplation looked up with concern as voices grew louder near the corner of Elgin Street. Martha Chen, a local high school history teacher who had brought her students to the memorial dozens of times before, felt an familiar uneasiness creep into her chest. She had seen this pattern before, the gradual erosion of solemnity that sometimes occurred when certain types of tourists arrived, treating sacred spaces like just another photo opportunity. A group of pigeons that had been peacefully pecking at the snow suddenly took flight, startled by a sharp whistle from somewhere near Spark Street. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife, causing several visitors to wince at its inappropriateness. Even the maintenance worker, Michel, paused in his careful snow clearing, his weathered face creasing with worry as he leaned on his shovel and observed the changing mood. The Japanese tour group, who had been quietly photographing the memorial's architectural details, began to pack up their equipment and move away, their guide noticing the shift in atmosphere. She had been leading tours in Ottawa for 15 years and had developed an almost sixth sense for when situations might become uncomfortable. With quiet efficiency, she gathered her group and directed them toward the peace of the nearby Byward Market. A young mother pulled her curious toddler closer as new voices approached, loud, boisterous, and completely out of sync with the memorial's dignified atmosphere. "Maybe we should come back later," she whispered to her husband, who nodded in agreement. They weren't the only ones making this decision. Several other visitors began to drift away from the memorial grounds, as if sensing the approaching disruption of their morning reverence. The fresh snow that had seemed so pristine earlier now bore the marks of increasing foot traffic, with clear paths worn through the powder, and several areas showing signs of people straying beyond the designated walkways. Small clumps of packed snow dotted the ground, evidence of visitors who had already succumbed to the temptation to play in the winter wonderland, despite the sacred nature of the location. Corporal McKinnon, ever vigilant at his post, noticed these subtle changes with growing concern. His years of military experience had taught him to read situations, to sense when the atmosphere was shifting from respectful tourism to potential disruption. Though his expression remained impassive, his trained eye caught every detail. The way certain visitors were now taking photos with exaggerated poses, the increasing volume of conversations, the gradual disregard for the ceremonial boundaries. The morning sun, now higher in the sky, cast longer shadows across the snow-covered plaza, creating an almost theatrical lighting that would have been beautiful if not for the growing tension. The eternal flame's steady burn seemed to flicker more prominently against the brightening day, as if itself sensing the approaching disturbance. Snowflakes continued to fall, but they now seemed to dance more erratically in the air, disturbed by the increasing movement and activity around the memorial. Two local police officers on their regular patrol slowed their pace as they passed the memorial grounds, exchanging knowing glances. They had seen similar situations develop before, particularly during tourist season, when the solemn dignity of the site clashed with some visitors' desire for entertainment. They decided to linger nearby, their instincts honed by years of experience telling them that their presence might be needed soon. The school group from Montreal, which had been so respectful earlier, now huddled closer to their teacher. One of the students, a perceptive 13-year-old named Sophie, whispered to her friend, "Something feels different." Her teacher, Madame Beaumont, quietly instructed her students to gather their belongings, recognizing that this might no longer be the ideal time for their educational visit. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it snippets of conversation from the approaching group. Words like boring and just standing there drifted across the plaza, each phrase landing like a small crack in the morning's solemnity. The elderly veteran straightened his Legion beret and gripped his cane tighter, his years of military service making him acutely aware of the building tension. Near the memorial's base, fresh footprints in the snow showed where someone had recently crossed the ceremonial rope barrier. Not far, but enough to demonstrate a growing disregard for the site's boundaries. A discarded coffee cup had rolled against one of the memorial's corners, its bright red and white paper jarring against the dignified stone and pristine snow. The morning light caught the brass buttons on McKinnon's greatcoat, sending brief flashes across the plaza like silent warnings. His training had taught him that moments like these, when respect began to waver and boundaries started to blur, were often preludes to more significant disruptions. Yet even he couldn't have predicted exactly how this particular morning would unfold, or how a simple snowball would soon transform this sacred space into the center of a national controversy. The source of the growing disruption became clear as a group of college students rounded the corner from Spark Street, their loud laughter cutting through the memorial's solemn atmosphere like a thunderclap. At the center of the group was Tyler Anderson, a 21-year-old sophomore from California State University, his designer winter jacket unzipped despite the cold, and his backwards baseball cap dusted with snow. The memorial's profound significance was completely lost on him. To Tyler, Ottawa was just another stop on his winter break adventure, and everything was potential content for his growing social media following. "Dude, this snow is insane," Tyler's voice carried across the plaza as he scooped up a handful of powder, letting it drift through his fingers. His four companions, similarly dressed in expensive winter wear that still had its price tags attached, crowded around him with their phones out. The group had spent the morning touring the Byward Market, documenting their authentic Canadian experience for their followers, each moment carefully curated for maximum online engagement. Tyler's latest TikTok video already had thousands of views, a compilation of him and his friends trying to pronounce Ottawa with exaggerated Canadian accents while eating maple-flavored everything from the market. Now, with fresh snow everywhere and a seemingly endless supply of photo opportunities, Tyler saw the memorial grounds as just another backdrop for his content creation. "Check this out," he called to his friend Brandon, who was adjusting the settings on his expensive camera. "Perfect lighting, fresh snow, and look, they've even got one of those British guards." Tyler gestured toward Corporal McKinnon, completely missing the significance of the ceremonial guard's distinct Canadian identity. The other tourists who remained in the plaza exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the disconnect between the group's behavior and the location's sanctity. Sarah Martinez, another member of Tyler's group, was slightly more observant. "Guys, maybe we should keep it down," she suggested, noticing the disapproving looks from other visitors. But her words were drowned out by Tyler's enthusiastic planning of their next viral moment. He had already gained a significant following from his Guards Around the World series, where he posed in increasingly elaborate ways near various ceremonial guards. None of his previous posts, however, had featured snow. "This is going to be epic," Tyler declared, pulling out his phone to check his hair in the front-facing camera. His expensive boots crunched through the fresh snow as he moved closer to the memorial, ignoring the clearly marked boundaries. The morning sun caught his white teeth as he grinned, practicing different expressions for what he imagined would be his most successful post yet. Brandon, ever the enabler, had already started setting up his camera equipment. "The lighting is perfect," he agreed, adjusting his lens. "The snow makes everything look so cinematic." He barely noticed when his tripod leg crossed the ceremonial rope barrier, too focused on finding the perfect angle to capture their planned performance. The remaining members of their group, Jessica Wong and Mike Patterson, hung back slightly, sharing a concerned look. They had known Tyler since freshman year and had seen his growing obsession with social media fame. What had started as harmless fun was increasingly pushing boundaries, each new post requiring something more outrageous than the last to maintain his followers' interest. "Tyler, there's actual people praying here," Jessica pointed out, her voice barely above a whisper. She had noticed the elderly veteran and could read the brass plaques explaining the site's significance, but Tyler was already in performance mode, his mind focused solely on creating what he called engaging content. "Relax, Jess," Tyler replied, brushing snow from his designer jeans. "People love this stuff. My last guard video got over 1 million views." He pulled up his phone to show her the statistics, completely oblivious to how his loud voice carried across the previously quiet plaza. The number of likes and shares had become his sole measure of success, drowning out any consideration of appropriateness or respect. Mike, who had been quietly observing the situation, made one last attempt to rein in his friend. "Man, this place seems kind of serious," he said, gesturing to the eternal flame and the carefully laid wreaths. "Maybe we should try something else?" But Tyler had already spotted what he considered the perfect prop, a fresh patch of untouched snow near the memorial's base. "Trust me," Tyler said, his voice carrying the absolute confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences for his actions. "This is going to be different. Everyone does the same boring poses with these guards. We're going to make something people actually want to watch." He was already formulating his video title, "You Won't Believe What This Guard Did in the Snow." The morning light caught the lens of Brandon's camera as he finished setting up his shot, creating a brief flash that drew disapproving glances from the remaining visitors. Tyler, interpreting the attention as potential audience engagement, only grew more animated. His designer boots left deep prints in the snow as he moved even closer to the ceremonial space, each step taking him further from appropriate behavior and closer to what would soon become an international incident. Little did Tyler know that his quest for viral fame was about to succeed, but not in the way he had planned. His next action would not only test the legendary discipline of the ceremonial guard, but would also spark a nationwide conversation about respect, tradition, and the price of social media celebrity in sacred spaces. Tyler's first attempt to provoke a reaction from the guard started subtly, at least by his standards. "Hey, check this out," he called to his followers on his phone's live stream, positioning himself just at the edge of the ceremonial boundary. "We've got ourselves a real-life Canadian statue here." His voice, pitched deliberately loud for his recording, shattered the morning's remaining tranquility like a hammer through glass. Several of the remaining visitors winced at the volume and inappropriate tone. The elderly veteran, who had been maintaining his quiet vigil, gripped his cane tighter, years of military discipline barely containing his growing displeasure. Martha Chen, the history teacher, had already begun ushering her students toward the exit, but they couldn't help watching the scene unfold, their young faces a mixture of embarrassment and fascination. "Do you think he even blinks?" Tyler continued, edging closer to Corporal McKinnon while Brandon adjusted his camera position. "Let's find out." He began waving his hand in front of the guard's face, each movement becoming more exaggerated than the last. The guard's expression remained impassive, though anyone with military experience might have noticed the subtle tightening around his eyes. the only visible sign of his internal response to this growing display of disrespect. Sarah Martinez, still trying to be the voice of reason, made another attempt to intervene. "Tyler, there are literally signs everywhere explaining this is a war memorial," she said, pointing to the nearby plaques. "Maybe we should—" But Tyler cut her off with an exaggerated eye roll, his attention fixed firmly on his phone's recording screen where comments were starting to pour in from his live audience. "Guys, the comments are loving this," he announced, completely misreading the situation. "Someone just dared me to see if I can make him smile." He turned back to McKinnon, whose stillness seemed to only encourage Tyler's escalating behavior. "Come on, man, give us something. You must be freezing out here in all this snow." Each word was accompanied by increasingly theatrical gestures, performed as much for his online audience as for his immediate companions. Brandon, caught up in the moment, had started circling with his camera, looking for the best angle to capture whatever might unfold. His expensive boots left deep tracks in the snow as he crossed and recrossed the ceremonial boundary, each step adding to the growing desecration of the sacred space. "The lighting is perfect," he called out. "Try getting closer to the guard. The contrast with the snow is insane." The maintenance worker, Michel, had stopped his snow clearing entirely, his weathered face dark with concern. In his 20 years tending the memorial grounds, he had seen his share of disrespectful behavior, but something about this felt different, more deliberate, more calculated. He reached slowly for his radio, sensing that this situation might require intervention. "Dude, these comments are wild," Tyler exclaimed, his voice growing louder with excitement. "Someone just offered $50 if I can get him to break character." He turned back to McKinnon, whose continued stoicism seemed to both frustrate and energize him. "Come on, my man, $50. That's like, what, 100 Canadian? He laughed at his own joke, encouraged by the laughing emoji flooding his live stream. Jessica and Mike had retreated to the periphery, their discomfort visible as they watched their friend's performance escalate. "This doesn't feel right," Jessica whispered, noticing how other visitors were either leaving in disgust or pulling out their own phones, perhaps sensing that something newsworthy was about to unfold. "Hey, what's the deal with the hat?" Tyler continued, pointing at McKinnon's bearskin cap. "Is that real fur? PETA's gonna be mad." He turned to his phone, playing to his audience. "Should we liberate the bear hat, guys? Drop some hearts in the chat if you want to see that." The stream of emoji responses seemed to fuel his performance, each new reaction pushing him further from reasonable behavior. The two police officers who had been patrolling nearby had noticed the commotion and began making their way toward the memorial, their pace unhurried but purposeful. They had handled similar situations before and knew that rushing in too quickly could sometimes escalate things unnecessarily. Still, they positioned themselves where they could quickly intervene if needed. "Tyler, man, maybe that's enough," Mike finally spoke up, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern. "This is supposed to be like a sacred place or something." But Tyler was too engrossed in his performance to hear the warning in his friend's tone. The livestream comments were coming faster now, along with an increasing number of viewers, and Tyler could almost taste the viral fame he'd been chasing. "Sacred place?" Tyler scoffed, playing to his audience. "It's just a guy in a funny hat standing in the snow. Watch this, I bet he's not even real." He reached out as if to poke McKinnon's arm, stopping just short of actual contact. The guard remained motionless, but those closest might have noticed his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. The morning sun had risen higher, casting stark shadows across the snow-covered plaza. The eternal flame flickered steadily, its constant presence a sharp contrast to the growing chaos around it. More phones had appeared among the remaining spectators, their cameras capturing what was quickly becoming a social media spectacle, though perhaps not the one Tyler had imagined. Little did Tyler know that his next action, the one that would vault him to viral fame, was about to cross a line from mere disrespect into something that would trigger a response no one in the growing crowd could have anticipated. The snowball that would soon leave his hand would do more than just disturb the peace. It would become a symbol in a national debate about respect, tradition, and the costs of social media fame. The growing spectacle at the National War Memorial had transformed the morning crowd into an unwitting audience, their reactions as varied as their backgrounds. The elderly veteran, William Morrison, who had been maintaining his quiet vigil since dawn, finally broke his silence. "In my 40 years of coming here," he muttered to the couple standing nearby, "I've never seen such blatant disrespect." His medals clinked softly against his jacket as he shook his head, each decoration telling its own story of sacrifice and service. Martha Chen's high school students had stopped their retreat, forming a tight cluster near the memorial's edge. "Miss," whispered Emma Thompson, one of her most perceptive students, "shouldn't someone do something?" The teacher's face reflected her internal struggle. This was becoming a teachable moment, though not the one she had planned for her Canadian history lesson. "Sometimes," she responded carefully, "watching and remembering is its own form of action." Near the ceremonial rope barrier, a group of businessmen and women who had been cutting through the plaza on their way to nearby government buildings found themselves unable to continue their morning commute. "This is absolutely shameful," declared Patricia O'Neill, a senior policy advisor, her briefcase clutched tightly as if to shield it from the disrespect in the air. "They should know better. This isn't some tourist playground." The Japanese tour group, who had initially started to leave, now stood in a tight cluster near the edge of the plaza. Their guide, Yuki Tanaka, translated the unfolding scene in hushed tones. "In Japan," she explained to her group in their native language, "we have a word for this kind of behavior. Kaiseki, lacking in respect for sacred spaces." Her tourists nodded solemnly, their cameras lowered out of respect, understanding transcending any language barrier. Michel, the maintenance worker, had positioned himself near his snow removal equipment, his radio now in hand, but not yet raised. His decades of experience at the memorial had taught him to read crowds, and this one was changing by the minute. "C'est pas bon," he murmured to himself, noting how the initially disapproving audience was starting to split into distinct camps. A young couple who had been planning their wedding photos at the memorial stood close together, the woman's engagement ring catching the morning light. "I can't believe they're letting this happen," Sarah Williams whispered to her fiancé James. "This is exactly why we wanted our photos here. The dignity, the history. And now—" Her voice trailed off as she watched Tyler's continuing performance. The two police officers, now stationed at the plaza's edge, maintained their professional distance while evaluating the situation. "Reminds me of that incident last summer," Officer Marie Dubois muttered to her partner. "Different tourist, same lack of respect." Officer Chen nodded, his hand resting casually on his radio, ready to call for backup if needed. A group of university students from Ottawa U had paused on their way to morning classes, their reactions mixed. "Someone should film this," said one, pulling out his phone. "No, someone should stop this," countered another, her voice carrying the weight of family military history. The debate spreading through their small group mirrored the larger conversation beginning to ripple through social media as Tyler's livestream gained viewers. Brandon's camera movements had drawn a small crowd of amateur photographers, their own cameras raised but with distinct hesitation. "This feels wrong," muttered one, lowering his expensive DSLR. "We'd be encouraging it." Another photographer, an older man with a press badge hanging from his neck, quietly took photos of the crowd's reactions instead, sensing the real story unfolding around the central spectacle. The morning's peaceful atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by a tense mixture of anticipation and unease. Small clusters of conversation broke out across the plaza, their whispered commentary forming a growing chorus of concern. "In my country," declared a visiting professor from Germany, "we understand the importance of memorial spaces." His words carried across the snow-covered ground, drawing nods from those nearby. A mother pulled her young son closer as he asked innocent questions about the unfolding scene. "But why is that man being so loud, Mommy?" The question, asked with childish directness, seemed to cut through the morning air, making several nearby adults shift uncomfortably. The mother's response was careful, measured. "Sometimes, sweetheart, people forget about respect." The crowd had grown larger now, with passing commuters stopping to witness the spectacle. Some pulled out phones, their fingers hovering over emergency contacts or social media apps. Others simply stood in stunned silence, their morning routines forgotten in the face of this unprecedented display. A street vendor who had been selling hot chocolate nearby had stopped his sales entirely, his paper cups forgotten as he watched the scene unfold. Two off-duty soldiers in civilian clothes had appeared at the edge of the plaza, their military bearing visible despite their casual attire. Their presence added another layer of tension to the scene, their rigid postures and focused attention speaking volumes about their professional assessment of the situation. They exchanged knowing looks, years of shared service allowing them to communicate without words. The eternal flame's steady burning seemed to stand in stark contrast to the growing chaos around it, its unwavering presence a reminder of the memorial's true purpose. As Tyler's performance continued, the crowd's reaction began to shift from mere disapproval to something more active, more engaged. The plaza had become a stage, but the real drama was unfolding in the faces and reactions of those watching, each person becoming part of a moment that would soon be shared and debated across the nation. Tyler's behavior shifted into an even more dangerous territory as his live stream's viewership continued to climb. The comments flooding his screen had become a blur of dares and challenges, each one pushing him further from reason. "Yo, someone just donated $50, he announced, his voice carrying across the now crowded plaza. "They want to see something epic with all this snow." The temperature had dropped slightly, causing breaths to form more visible clouds in the crisp air. Tyler's face had reddened from both excitement and cold as he began gathering snow in his gloved hands. Brandon, still filming, had positioned himself for what he called the perfect angle, his expensive camera equipment now completely over the ceremonial boundary line. "Tyler, seriously, don't," Sarah Martinez pleaded, her voice carrying genuine alarm. She had noticed the two off-duty soldiers exchanging glances, their stance shifting subtly into what she recognized from her military family as a ready position. But Tyler was beyond hearing warnings now, his attention completely absorbed by the growing digital audience. "Chat wants to know if Canadian guards are as uptight as the British ones," Tyler announced, packing snow between his hands. The morning sun caught his designer watch as he worked, the expensive timepiece a stark contrast to the crude Snowball taking shape in his grip. "Let's find out together." His voice had taken on a performative quality, each word carefully enunciated for his viewers. Mike Patterson made one final attempt to intervene, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Bro, think about this. Your channel could get banned." But Tyler brushed him aside with a laugh that seemed to echo off the memorial's stone surfaces. "Banned? This is going to go viral. Nobody's ever done this before." The crowd's reaction intensified. William Morrison, the elderly veteran, had begun making his way toward the nearby police officers, his medals catching the light with each determined step. Martha Chen's students had their phones out now, though their teacher noticed they were documenting the crowd's reactions rather than Tyler's performance, a detail that would later prove significant in the coming media storm. 5,000 viewers, Tyler crowed, briefly turning his back to the guard to address his livestream audience directly. Time to give them what they came for. The snow in his hands had been packed into a perfect sphere, compact enough to hold together but not so dense as to cause serious harm, or so he mistakenly believed. The maintenance worker, Michel, had finally raised his radio to his lips, speaking rapid French into the device. The two police officers had begun moving forward, but the growing crowd made their progress slow. Officer Dubois's voice cut through the morning air. "Sir, step back from the memorial immediately." But Tyler was committed to his performance now. He had turned back to face Corporal McKinnon, whose stoic expression remained unchanged despite the chaos unfolding before him. "Hey, Mr. Guard," Tyler called out, his voice taking on a sing-song quality that made several onlookers cringe. "I've got a little Canadian welcome gift for you." The Japanese tourists had begun filming now too, their guide translating Tyler's words with increasing concern. A group of schoolchildren on their way to Parliament Hill had stopped to watch, their young faces a mixture of fascination and uncertainty. Their teacher tried to hurry them along, but the moment seemed frozen in time. "Content warning," Tyler announced to his phone, playing to his audience. "What you're about to see might contain scenes of a Canadian guard actually moving. His attempted humor fell flat in the tense atmosphere, but the livestream comments continued to flood in, a digital tide pushing him toward his foolish goal. Brandon had started a countdown for dramatic effect, his camera steady on its tripod. 3, 2. The morning light caught the lens, sending a brief flash across the snow-covered plaza. Jessica had turned away completely, unable to watch what she knew was coming. Mike stood frozen, his hand still half raised in a failed attempt to stop his friend. The snowball felt perfect in Tyler's grip as he raised it above his shoulder. Time seemed to slow down as various voices rang out across the plaza. "Don't! Stop him! Someone do something!" But their warnings melted into the winter air like snowflakes, unable to penetrate Tyler's bubble of social media-fueled bravado. "This is going to break the internet," Tyler declared, his arm beginning its forward motion. The crowd seemed to collectively hold its breath. Officer Chen had broken into a run, but he was still too far away. The off-duty soldiers had started moving too, their civilian clothes not hampering their military bearing. Corporal McKinnon remained motionless, though those closest might have noticed a subtle shift in his stance, a nearly imperceptible adjustment that only years of military training could produce. The morning sun caught his collar pin, sending a brief flash of light across the snow-covered ground. Tyler's filming arm remained steady, even as his throwing arm completed its arc. "Let's see what Canadian guards are made of," he shouted, his voice echoing off the memorial's stone facade. The snowball left his hand in a perfect arc, its trajectory aimed directly at the guard's chest. The moment hung in the air like the surrounding snowflakes, time stretching like a rubber band about to snap. What happened next would be replayed thousands of times across social media platforms, analyzed in news broadcasts, and debated in editorial columns across the country. The next few seconds would transform a peaceful winter morning at the National War Memorial into a viral moment that would spark nationwide discussions about respect, tradition, and the price of social media fame. The snowball arced through the crisp morning air, its trajectory a perfect parabola against the winter sky. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as every eye in the plaza fixed on its path. Brandon's camera tracked its movement with professional precision, while dozens of phone cameras captured the moment from various angles. The morning sun caught the compressed snow, making it glisten like a crystalline projectile headed straight for Corporal McKinnon's chest. What happened next occurred so quickly that many witnesses would later debate exactly what they saw. In a movement that seemed to defy human limitations, McKinnon executed a precise sidestep that appeared both effortless and deliberately controlled. The snowball passed through the space where he had stood just milliseconds before, exploding against the memorial's stone surface with a soft poff. A cloud of powder scattered across the sacred stone, leaving a wet mark that seemed to stain more than just the physical surface. The plaza fell into absolute silence. Even Tyler's livestream viewers, their comments still scrolling rapidly across his phone screen, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment through their digital connection. The only sound was the gentle crackling of the eternal flame and the soft settling of disturbed snow. McKinnon returned to his position with mechanical precision, his movement so exact it appeared choreographed. His eyes, which had remained forward throughout the entire incident, now fixed directly on Tyler with an intensity that made several onlookers step back involuntarily. The temperature on the plaza seemed to drop several degrees under that gaze. Tyler, still holding his phone in streaming position, let out a nervous laugh that echoed hollowly across the now silent space. "Yo, did you see that? Man's got moves." His voice, attempting to maintain its performative enthusiasm, cracked slightly at the edges. The reality of what he had just done was beginning to penetrate his social media-induced euphoria. Brandon's camera had frozen in position, its operator suddenly unsure whether to continue filming. The tripod leg that had crossed the ceremonial boundary now seemed like a violation he couldn't ignore. Sarah Martinez had covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock. Mike Patterson had taken several steps back, instinctively distancing himself from what he knew was coming. The off-duty soldiers had stopped their approach, recognizing something in McKinnon's bearing that civilians might have missed. They exchanged knowing looks, their posture shifting from intervention to observation. They had seen that look before. It was the calm before a disciplined storm. Then, cutting through the silence like a blade through ice, came McKinnon's voice. It wasn't loud, but it carried across the plaza with parade ground authority. Step back. Behind the line. Now. Each word was precisely enunciated, carrying the weight of centuries of military tradition. The command was clear, unyielding, and absolute. Tyler's phone captured his expression, changing from manufactured bravado to genuine uncertainty. His live-stream comments exploded with activity, the screen becoming a blur of exclamation points and shocked emoji. "Yo! He talks!" Tyler attempted to maintain his performance, but his voice had lost its confident edge. "What's next? Gonna arrest me for throwing snow?" The elderly veteran, William Morrison, had moved to stand beside one of the police officers. His voice carried clearly across the plaza. "That's not just snow, young man. That's desecration." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Several phones in the crowd had turned to capture his statement, sensing the historical weight of the moment. Officer Dubois had finally reached the ceremonial boundary, her hand resting casually but purposefully on her belt. "Sir," she addressed Tyler, her tone professional but firm. "Step back as the guard instructed." Officer Chen had circled around to the other side, effectively cutting off any potential escape route. Tyler's friends had begun to scatter. Jessica was already walking quickly toward Spark Street, her face burning with embarrassment. Brandon had finally lowered his camera, though he hadn't stopped recording, a decision that would later prove significant in the coming media coverage. Only Mike remained close by, though he had positioned himself carefully out of arm's reach of his friend. "The snow hit the memorial," someone in the crowd pointed out, their voice carrying a mix of shock and accusation. The wet mark on the stone had begun to drip, each drop seeming to emphasize the gravity of Tyler's actions. Martha Chen's students had fallen completely silent, their phones still recording as their teacher quietly explained the significance of what they were witnessing. McKinnon's next words came with the same measured authority. "You have disrespected a sacred memorial to fallen soldiers." His voice carried no anger, no emotion at all, just the weight of absolute certainty. "That will have consequences." Tyler's phone nearly slipped from his suddenly sweaty grip. The reality of his situation was finally beginning to dawn on him. His livestream viewers had exploded into a frenzy of comments, but he could no longer focus on them. The memorial grounds had transformed from a stage for his performance into something else entirely, a place where actions had real immediate consequences. The morning sun continued to rise over Ottawa, its light now clearly illuminating the wet mark on the memorial where the snowball had struck. The eternal flame flickered steadily, its constant presence a reminder of the enduring nature of memory and respect. What had started as a quest for social media fame was about to become a very different kind of viral moment, one that would spark a national conversation about the intersection of sacred spaces, social media culture, and the consequences of disrespect. What happened next demonstrated why the ceremonial guard's training went far beyond simply standing motionless. McKinnon's response was a masterclass in controlled authority, each movement precisely calculated for maximum effect with minimum force. His right hand moved to his rifle with drill-square precision, adjusting its position ever so slightly, a subtle but clear reminder that he was a soldier, not a prop for tourist entertainment. "You will remain exactly where you are," McKinnon commanded, his voice carrying the same measured authority that had silenced the plaza moments before. The words weren't shouted, but they seemed to echo off the memorial's stone surfaces with unmistakable power. Tyler, his phone still live-streaming, found himself involuntarily taking a step backward, his designer boots slipping slightly on the snow. Officer Dubois had positioned herself strategically to Tyler's left, while Officer Chen maintained his position on the right. Their movements were coordinated with the kind of unspoken communication that came from years of partnership. "Young man," Officer Dubois began, her tone professionally neutral, but brooked no argument. "You are currently in violation of several sections of the Memorial Protection Act." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the tension in the air. The Japanese tour guide had begun translating rapidly for her group, explaining the significance of what they were witnessing. "This is not just about a snowball," she explained in hushed Japanese. "This is about national honor." Her tourists nodded solemnly, their cameras lowered out of respect for the gravity of the moment. Brandon had finally stepped back from his tripod, letting his camera continue recording unmanned. His face had lost its earlier excitement, replaced by a growing realization of the situation's seriousness. Sarah Martinez had moved to stand near Mike Patterson, both of them watching their friend with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. "Listen, it was just a joke," Tyler attempted, his voice having lost all its previous bravado. "I didn't mean any—" But McKinnon cut him off with a slight shift in posture that somehow commanded more attention than any shout could have. The guard's next words were delivered with precision that cut through all excuses. "The names on this memorial are not a joke. The sacrifices honored here are not for your entertainment." The elderly veteran, William Morrison, had begun speaking quietly to other members of the crowd, his voice carrying decades of military experience. "Notice his control," he murmured to those nearby. "That's what real discipline looks like." His words spread through the gathering in whispers, creating a running commentary that would later appear in countless social media posts. Martha Chen's students had fallen completely silent, their phones still recording but their earlier excitement replaced by something more profound. They were witnessing a lesson in consequences that no classroom could have provided. Their teacher made mental notes for the discussion she knew would follow, recognizing the educational value of this moment. Officer Chen spoke into his radio, his voice low but clear. "Control. We have a Memorial Act violation at the National War Memorial. Requesting support from Memorial Protection Unit." The response came quickly, acknowledgement crackling through the cold air. The term Memorial Protection Unit seemed to finally penetrate Tyler's awareness, his live stream commentary falling silent. 2 more uniformed officers had appeared at the plaza's edges, moving with purposeful calm through the growing crowd. They carried themselves with the distinctive bearing of the specialized unit, tasked with protecting national monuments. Their arrival marked a shift in the situation from a tourist disturbance to an official incident. McKinnon's next movements were a demonstration of ceremonial precision. Without breaking his forward gaze, he executed a quarter turn that positioned him to directly face Tyler while maintaining his guard stance. The maneuver, practiced countless times in training, served both practical and symbolic purposes. Practically, it gave him a better position to observe. Symbolically, it forced Tyler to confront the full weight of his authority. "Your disrespect has been documented," McKinnon stated, each word falling like a hammer stroke in the winter air. The wet mark on the memorial stone had begun to freeze, creating a visible reminder of the transgression. Several phones in the crowd focused on this detail, their cameras capturing what would become a powerful symbol in the coming media coverage. The Memorial Protection Unit officers had reached their positions, their black uniforms standing out against the snow. One of them, a sergeant by his insignia, addressed Tyler with cold professionalism. "Sir, you will need to accompany us to the Memorial Protection Office. Your friends may collect their equipment and leave the premises immediately." Brandon had already begun dismantling his tripod, his movements rushed and clumsy in his haste to distance himself from the situation. Sarah and Mike stood frozen, uncertain whether to stay in support of their friend or follow Brandon's lead. The decision was made for them when Officer Dubois firmly instructed them to clear the area. Tyler's phone had slipped to his side, though his live stream continued to record. His viewers were witnessing a very different kind of viral content than what he had planned. Instead of a prank video, they were watching its sobering consequences unfold in real time. Comments continued to flood the stream, but their tone had shifted dramatically from encouragement to criticism. The morning sun had risen fully now, its light catching the brass buttons on McKinnon's uniform as he maintained his vigilant stance. The eternal flame continued its steady burn, its constancy a stark contrast to the dramatic scene unfolding before it. What had begun as an attempt at social media fame was transforming into a moment of national significance, a lesson about respect that would soon reach far beyond the snow-covered plaza of the National War Memorial. The arrival of the Memorial Protection Unit marked the moment when Tyler's social media stunt transformed into a serious legal matter. Sergeant James McPherson, a 20-year veteran of the specialized unit, approached with the measured steps of someone who had handled similar incidents before. His black uniform, distinct from regular police, carried an array of insignia that spoke to the unit's specialized role in protecting Canada's sacred spaces. "I need to see some identification," McPherson stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Tyler fumbled with his pockets, his previously steady live stream feed now shaking noticeably. His phone captured the moment his California driver's license passed into the sergeant's gloved hands, a detail that would later feature prominently in news coverage about international visitors disrespecting Canadian monuments. Officer Dubois had begun taking statements from witnesses, her notebook filling with accounts that would form part of the official record. "The snowball was thrown deliberately," stated Martha Chen, her students nodding in confirmation behind her. "He was performing for his social media followers." Each testimony added another layer to what was rapidly becoming a significant case. The elderly veteran, William Morrison, provided his own statement with military precision. "As a witness to this desecration," he began, his voice steady, "I can confirm that the young man showed complete disregard for both the posted regulations and verbal warnings. His medals caught the morning light as he spoke, lending additional weight to his words. Brandon, still hastily packing his camera equipment, found himself approached by Officer Chen. "Sir, we'll need to review your footage as evidence." The officer's tone was professional but firm. "All recordings of the incident are now part of an official investigation. Brandon's expensive camera, which had captured everything in high definition, would soon provide prosecutors with invaluable documentation." Sarah Martinez had begun crying softly, the reality of the situation finally hitting her. "We tried to stop him," she told one of the memorial protection officers, her voice shaking. "We told him it was disrespectful." Her statement would later be noted as evidence of premeditation. Tyler had been warned but had chosen to proceed anyway. The specialized unit's response vehicle had arrived, its official markings drawing additional attention from passers-by. 2 more officers emerged, carrying evidence collection equipment. They began photographing the impact mark on the memorial, measuring distances, and documenting the scene with professional thoroughness that suggested this was far from their first such investigation. Under Section 22.1 of the National Capital Act, Sergeant McPherson began reading from an official document, his voice carrying across the now hushed plaza. "Any action that defaces or disrespects a national memorial is subject to significant penalties." The word significant seemed to echo in the winter air, causing Tyler to visibly pale. The Japanese tour group's guide had begun translating the proceedings for her guests, her careful explanation highlighting the seriousness with which Canada treated such violations. "This is how a nation protects its honor," she explained in Japanese, her words causing several of her tourists to nod approvingly as they witnessed Canadian justice in action. Mike Patterson found himself providing a reluctant statement to the authorities. "He's been doing these guard videos at different places," he explained, his voice heavy with regret. "It's all about getting views and followers." This information would later prove crucial in establishing a pattern of behavior for the prosecution. Corporal McKinnon had resumed his guard position, his posture as perfect as ever, but now he stood as both sentry and witness. His official statement would be taken later, adding the weight of military authority to the growing case file. The wet mark on the memorial stone had begun to freeze over, nature itself seeming to preserve evidence of the transgression. Officer Dubois spoke quietly into her radio. "Dispatch, we'll need representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs. This falls under their jurisdiction as well." The response was immediate. This incident was rapidly climbing the chain of command, involving multiple government agencies. Tyler's live stream continued to record, though his hand had dropped to his side, the camera now capturing a confused angle of boots and snow. The comment section had exploded with activity, but not the kind he'd hoped for. Viewers were witnessing the consequences of his actions in real time, many expressing shock at the seriousness of the response. "Your social media accounts will need to be preserved as evidence," one of the memorial protection officers informed Tyler, making notes on an official form. Any attempt to delete content related to this incident will result in additional charges. The officer's words transformed Tyler's online presence from a source of pride to potential legal evidence. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the snow-covered plaza. The eternal flame continued its steady burn, its constancy a reminder of the enduring nature of memory and respect. What had begun as a quest for viral fame was now generating a different kind of publicity, one that would serve as a warning to others who might consider treating sacred spaces as backdrops for social media stunts. Sergeant McPherson completed his initial documentation and turned to Tyler, whose social media bravado had completely evaporated. "You'll need to come with us to the Memorial Protection Office," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "There are several agencies that will want to speak with you about your actions today." As Tyler was being escorted to the Memorial Protection Unit vehicle, the crowd's response transformed from shocked silence into something more powerful. It began with a slow clap from William Morrison, the elderly veteran, his weathered hands coming together in a deliberate rhythm. The sound carried across the snow-covered plaza like rolling thunder, and within moments, others joined in. The applause spread through the gathering crowd like a wave, building in intensity. It wasn't the kind of applause you'd hear at a performance or sporting event. This was different, weighted with meaning. It was a spontaneous show of support for tradition, respect, and the unwavering dignity displayed by Corporal McKinnon throughout the incident. "This is how we protect our heritage," someone called out from the crowd. The voice belonged to Patricia O'Neill, the government policy advisor who had witnessed the entire incident. Her words seemed to resonate with everyone present, and several people nodded in emphatic agreement. Phones captured her statement, and it would later become one of the most shared quotes in the media coverage. Martha Chen's students, who had witnessed everything, had already begun posting their recordings to social media. But unlike Tyler's attempted prank video, their posts carried a different message. "Watch how a real Canadian guard handles disrespect," one student wrote. "This is what happens when you mess with sacred spaces," added another. Their young voices would prove instrumental in shaping the online narrative that followed. The Japanese tour group had remained throughout the incident, and now their guide, Yuki Tanaka, was explaining the significance of the crowd's reaction to her guests. "This is not just applause," she translated in Japanese. "This is a nation standing up for its values." Her tourists bowed respectfully toward the memorial, a gesture that several Canadians in the crowd noticed and appreciated. Near the memorial's edge, two young children asked their mother why everyone was clapping. Her response, overheard by those nearby, would later be quoted in several news articles. "We're clapping because sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's always important." The simple wisdom of her words captured the essence of what had transpired. The off-duty soldiers who had witnessed everything exchanged knowing looks. One of them, a sergeant with 3 tours of duty under his belt, spoke quietly to those around him. That guard did everything by the book. Perfect restraint, perfect procedure. His professional assessment would later be cited in training materials for future ceremonial guards. Social media was already buzzing with activity, but not in the way Tyler had hoped. Videos of the incident were being shared rapidly, with captions praising the guard's professionalism and condemning the disrespect shown to the memorial. Hashtags like "Not Respect Our Memorials" and "Canadian Pride" began trending locally, then nationally. The maintenance worker, Michelle, who had witnessed countless tourists come and go over his 2 decades at the memorial, spoke to a small group gathered near his snow removal equipment. "In all my years here," he said in his Quebec accented English, "I've never seen a more perfect response to disrespect." His words were captured on several phones and would later appear in local news coverage. Parents in the crowd had begun using the incident as an impromptu teaching moment. "See how the guard maintained his dignity?" one father explained to his teenage son. "That's real strength, not showing off for social media." Similar conversations echoed across the plaza as adults helped younger observers understand the significance of what they'd witnessed. A group of university students who had stopped to watch the incident unfold had already begun a discussion about social media responsibility. "This isn't about views or likes," one student declared. It's about understanding the difference between entertainment and sacred spaces. Their debate would later expand into a formal discussion in their media ethics class. The crowd's support wasn't just for the guards' actions. It represented a broader statement about values and respect. Each person who remained in the plaza seemed to understand that they were participating in a moment that transcended the immediate incident. They were standing up for tradition, honor, and the importance of sacred spaces in an increasingly digital world. As the memorial protection vehicle pulled away with Tyler inside, a spontaneous chorus of "Oh Canada" began somewhere in the crowd. The national anthem spread slowly at first, then with growing strength. The sound carried across the snow-covered grounds, past the eternal flame, and into the winter morning air. It wasn't planned or orchestrated. It was simply the natural expression of a crowd united in their appreciation for their nation's values. Even the most cynical observers found themselves moved by the display. A local journalist who had arrived to cover the disturbance was overheard saying to his cameraman, "This isn't just about a snowball anymore. This is about who we are as Canadians." His observation would later form the basis of an editorial that would go viral across the country. The morning sun continued to climb in the sky, its light catching the memorial's clean lines and casting long shadows across the snow. The wet mark where the snowball had struck was already beginning to disappear, but the impact of the incident would resonate far beyond the physical evidence. What had started as one tourist's misguided attempt at social media fame had transformed into a powerful reminder of the enduring strength of respect, tradition, and collective values. As the crowd's impromptu rendition of "Oh Canada" faded into the winter morning, a profound moment of silence settled over the National War Memorial. The sun had risen higher now, its rays catching the fresh snow and creating a crystalline display that seemed to highlight the dignity of the sacred space. Corporal McKinnon stood at his post, somehow appearing even more resolute than before, his stance a living embodiment of unwavering duty. Then, through the hushed quiet, came the sound of small boots crunching in snow. A young girl no more than 7 years old had stepped forward from the crowd. In her mittened hands, she clutched a small Canadian flag, the kind given out during Canada Day celebrations. Her mother, standing nearby, watched with quiet pride as her daughter approached the ceremonial rope barrier. The child stopped precisely at the boundary line, demonstrating more respect for the memorial's protocols than many adults. She looked up at Corporal McKinnon with clear, serious eyes that seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, despite her young age. In her other hand, she now held a hand-drawn card, its edges slightly crumpled from being carried in her pocket. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent plaza. "Thank you for protecting our memorial." The words were simple, but profound, carrying the pure sincerity that only a child could convey. She carefully placed both the flag and the card at the edge of the boundary line, then stepped back and executed a small bow that she had clearly practiced. McKinnon, while maintaining his formal stance, acknowledged her gesture with a precise nod, the same ceremonial response used to acknowledge dignitaries during official ceremonies. The moment wasn't lost on the crowd. Several phones captured the exchange, but this time the recordings were made with reverence rather than sensation-seeking. The young girl's mother later explained to those nearby that her daughter had insisted on making the card that morning after hearing about veterans at school. "She said she wanted to thank the people who protect our memories," the mother shared, her voice thick with emotion. "We never expected to be here for this." The timing of her daughter's gesture seemed almost providential. William Morrison, the elderly veteran, had remained at the plaza's edge. Watching the young girl's gesture, he removed his Legion beret and held it over his heart. "This," he declared to those within earshot, "is the real Canada." His words carried the weight of someone who had served, who understood the true meaning of the memorial and its guardians. The maintenance worker, Michel, had quietly resumed his duties, but now he worked with an even greater sense of purpose. As he cleared the paths around the memorial, he ensured that the spot where the young girl's gifts lay remained undisturbed. The small flag fluttered in the winter breeze, its red and white colors stark against the snow. Martha Chen's students, who had witnessed everything from the initial disrespect to this moment of redemption, were unusually quiet. One student was overheard saying to another, "This should be in our history books." Their teacher nodded in agreement, knowing that today's events would indeed become a teaching moment for years to come. The Japanese tourists, who had remained throughout the entire incident, began taking photos again, but now with a different focus. Their guide explained that they were documenting what she called the real spirit of Canada. Each click of their cameras seemed more like paying respect than taking tourist photos. As the morning continued, more people began approaching the boundary line, each following the young girl's example of careful respect. A bouquet of winter flowers appeared, then another small flag, then a veteran's poppy. Each item was placed with deliberate care, creating an impromptu tribute that spoke volumes about the community's values. The two police officers who had assisted during the incident remained nearby, but their stance had relaxed. Officer Dubois was overheard explaining to a curious bystander, "This is why we do this job, not just to enforce laws, but to protect what matters to people." Her partner, Officer Chen, nodded in agreement as he watched more citizens approach with their small tokens of respect. A group of high school students on their way to Parliament Hill for a field trip stopped to observe the growing collection of tributes. Their teacher, seeing an opportunity, began quietly explaining the significance of the memorial and its guardians. The students listened with unusual attention, the morning's events having transformed an ordinary field trip into something more meaningful. Corporal McKinnon maintained his watch, his posture perfect, his dedication unwavering. But those closest to him might have noticed something different in his bearing. Not a change in his professional demeanor, but perhaps an added layer of pride. He stood not just as a guard now, but as a symbol of something larger, the enduring importance of respect, duty, and tradition. The eternal flame continued its steady burn, its light now competing with the full morning sun. The snow where Tyler's ill-conceived prank had left its mark had completely melted away, but something more permanent had taken its place. A renewed appreciation for the sacred spaces that helped define a nation's character. What had begun as an attempt to mock tradition had instead reinforced its importance. The small Canadian flag, planted by a child's innocent hand, had done more to capture public attention than any viral video could have achieved. It stood as a reminder that sometimes the quietest gestures carry the loudest messages, and that respect, once demonstrated, has a way of multiplying itself through the hearts and actions of others. The video of the Snowball incident spread across social media platforms faster than the Canadian winter wind. Within hours, multiple angles of the event had been uploaded, each capturing a different perspective of the moment that would spark a nationwide conversation about respect, tradition, and the impact of social media culture on sacred spaces. Tyler's original live stream had been preserved by his viewers' recordings, though his own account was quickly suspended by the platform for violating community guidelines. The comment section on every repost told its own story. "This is how you protect national heritage," and "Canadian Guard shows perfect restraint" became common refrains. The narrative wasn't what Tyler had intended. Instead of becoming famous for pranking a guard, he became infamous as an example of what not to do. Major news networks picked up the story, their coverage extending far beyond the initial incident. "Guard's professional response to memorial disrespect goes viral," read one headline. "Snowball incident sparks national debate on sacred spaces," declared another. The morning shows featured interviews with military experts, social media analysts, and cultural commentators, all discussing the broader implications of what had transpired. Veterans groups across the country issued statements supporting Corporal McKinnon's response. The Royal Canadian Legion's national president appeared on multiple news programs, using the incident to highlight the importance of memorial protection. "What we witnessed wasn't just about a snowball," he explained. "It was about protecting the memory of those who gave everything for our freedom." The Department of Veterans Affairs announced an immediate review of memorial protection protocols, though they praised the current system's effectiveness as demonstrated by McKinnon's response. New educational initiatives were proposed, aimed at helping younger generations understand the significance of national memorials in an age of social media. Tourism organizations began incorporating the incident into their visitor guidelines. Respect our memorials became a prominent message in tourist information packets, with several organizations using stills from the incident, with faces blurred, as examples of prohibited behavior. The Japanese tour group's respectful response was highlighted as a model for international visitors. Martha Chen's students' recordings became part of an educational package distributed to schools across Canada. Their perspective, young people witnessing and understanding the importance of respect, proved particularly valuable in reaching their peers. The teacher herself was invited to contribute to a new curriculum module about civic responsibility in the digital age. Local artists responded to the event in their own way. A painting appeared in an Ottawa gallery showing the memorial in winter, with the small Canadian flag and card in the foreground. A poet laureate composed a piece titled "Standing Guard," which was later read at a remembrance ceremony. The incident had transformed from a moment of disrespect into a source of artistic inspiration about duty and honor. The young girl's gesture with the flag and card became a symbol in its own right. Similar acts of respect began appearing at memorials across the country. Children and adults alike would approach with small flags, cards, or flowers, each careful to maintain proper distance and decorum. What started as one child's spontaneous gesture evolved into a new tradition of showing appreciation for memorial guards. Social media platforms took notice as well. Several implemented new policies regarding content filmed at memorial sites, with stricter guidelines about respectful behavior. Tyler's video became a case study in digital citizenship courses, teaching students about the real-world consequences of online actions. Corporal McKinnon received commendations for his handling of the situation, though he maintained his characteristic modesty. In a rare interview months later, he simply stated, "I was doing my duty." His response became a training example for future ceremonial guards, demonstrating the perfect balance of authority and restraint. The Memorial Protection Unit reported a significant decrease in disruptive incidents following the event. "The video served as a deterrent," explained Sergeant McPherson. "People realize these spaces are actively protected, and disrespect has consequences." Their annual report noted a marked improvement in visitor behavior at all national memorial sites. Tourism to the National War Memorial actually increased in the months following the incident, but with a noticeable difference in visitor behavior. People approached with greater reverence, often spending time reading the plaques and reflecting on the memorial's significance rather than simply taking photos. The incident even made its way into parliamentary discussions about protecting national heritage sites in the digital age. New legislation was proposed to strengthen penalties for memorial disrespect, with broad support across political parties. The Snowball incident was cited repeatedly as an example of why such protections were necessary. As winter turned to spring, the story maintained its relevance. Historical societies and military museums incorporated it into their presentations about the evolution of memorial protection. What could have been a forgotten social media stunt instead became a teaching moment about respect, duty, and the enduring importance of protecting sacred spaces. The final images that went viral weren't of the Snowball's impact or Tyler's arrest, but of the growing collection of flags, cards, and tokens of respect that continued to appear at the memorial's boundary. These silent tributes spoke volumes about how a moment of disrespect had transformed into a powerful reminder of what it means to honor tradition, respect sacrifice, and stand guard over a nation's memory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.